At 3 in the morning on the farm, I was jolted awake by a noise. Peeking through my window, I saw my daughter-in-law burying something in my yard with a flashlight. After she left, I dug it up and nearly fainted when I saw what was inside. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of vengeance from. I want to know how far it has traveled. That night, the silence of my ranch was shattered by a strange noise. I woke with a start, my eyes burning and my heart hammering against my ribs. The old wall clock, an antique that had been in my family for generations, kept ticking away, its hands pointing to nearly 3 in the morning. Outside, the darkness was thick. Only the pale moonlight squeezed through a gap in the curtain, painting stripes of icy silver on the wooden floor. I stayed still, trying to listen, but that dry, scratching sound kept coming from the garden, as if someone was digging into the earth with something sharp. On this remote ranch in the heart of Texas, a strange noise at this hour is never a good sign. The dogs outside suddenly started barking, short, sharp, alert barks, as if they also sensed something was wrong. My heart seized, and a chill ran down my spine. I've lived 66 years, and I've seen everything out here in the country, from tornadoes that rip off roofs to cattle rustlers in the dead of night. But I'd never felt as uneasy as I did now, as if an invisible hand were squeezing my throat. I quickly threw on my old wool shawl, the one my mother knitted for me before she passed, and tiptoed to the window. With my bare feet trembling on the cold wood, I pulled the curtain back just enough to create a tiny slit, just enough to see without being seen. Under the moonlight, a silhouette appeared, blurry in the night's haze. I held my breath, straining my eyes to recognize her. It was Melissa, my daughter-in-law. She was standing there, alone, near the old wooden fence at the edge of the garden. In one hand, she held a small flashlight, its weak beam darting back and forth across the ground. In the other, she clutched a spade, which she plunged forcefully into the soft earth with firm, practiced movements. At her feet, a black duffel bag lay on the ground, bulging in a strange way, as if it held something heavy and hard inside. Seeing that, I felt my heart was going to leap out of my chest. What was Melissa doing out there at this hour? Why was she digging? And what was in that bag that made her sneak around like this? I saw her glance back at the house, her shoulders tense like a wild animal afraid of being discovered. Every time the flashlight beam passed over her face, I could see the glint of sweat on her temple, even though the night was cold enough to chill you to the bone. She began to dig faster, with hurried, almost desperate motions. When the hole was deep enough, Melissa knelt, quickly tossed the black bag inside, and started shoveling dirt over it. The sound of the spade had a steady rhythm, but I could hear her ragged breathing in the night's silence. Behind the curtain, I was frozen, my chest aching from holding my breath for so long. I wanted to scream at her, to run out and ask what she was doing, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. Something about the way Melissa moved, her coldness, her determination, scared me. This wasn't the sweet daughter-in-law I knew, the one who laughed with joy when she was pregnant with Annie, the one who would sit with me in the kitchen to learn the family's brisket recipe. When she finished filling the hole, Melissa carefully stomped on the fresh dirt, as if to erase any trace. She grabbed a handful of dry grass and scattered it on top, camouflaging it perfectly. Then, as if nothing had happened, she turned off the flashlight, pulled the hood of her sweatshirt over her head, and walked silently back to the house. Under the pale moon, her shadow looked like a ghost, gliding smoothly, but it left a nameless fear in me. I waited until I heard the door to her room close softly, until the click of the lock echoed in the darkness. Only then did I dare to breathe out. but my breath came out shaky, as if I were the one who had just done something wrong. I couldn't stay in bed any longer. The image of Melissa digging that hole, that strangely bulging black bag, wouldn't stop replaying in my mind. I had to know. I had to know what she had buried. I crept out into the yard, my bare feet stepping on the ice-cold dew of the night. With trembling hands, I grabbed the small garden spade that Eddie, my son, always used. I searched for the exact spot where the earth was freshly turned, where Melissa had been standing. The soil was still damp, soft, easy to dig. But with every scoop, my heart beat harder, like a war drum. I was scared of what I would find, but I couldn't stop. I needed the truth, no matter how terrible it might be. After a few layers of dirt, the tip of the spade hit something hard. I knelt and used my hands to dig. My nails sank into the cold earth. I pulled out the black bag, my heart pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My trembling hands unzipped it, and then I froze. Inside the bag was a kitchen knife, its steel blade stained with something thick, dark red, that shone in the moonlight. Next to the knife, a shirt, one of those work shirts Eddie wore, was covered in horrible dark red stains. The metallic smell of blood hit me, and my stomach turned. My head spun, as if the whole world was collapsing. The air caught in my throat, and I fell to my knees on the damp, cold ground. Everything went blurry, and the darkness swallowed me. When I woke up, the dew had soaked through my shawl. It was still dark. Luckily, no one had seen me lying there, passed out next to that ghastly hole. Shaking, I tried to get up on all fours. My hands, still covered in dirt, quickly put the knife and shirt back in the bag, and I filled the hole again just as it had been. I didn't want Melissa to know I'd seen anything. Not yet. I needed time to think, to understand what was happening. But as I shoveled the dirt, each scoop felt like a knife twisting in my heart. I stumbled back to my room, my feet as heavy as lead. I collapsed onto my bed, my whole body ice cold, as if my blood had stopped flowing. A horrible thought entered my mind, as sharp as the knife I had just seen. That night, Eddie, my son, hadn't come home. He always came home, no matter how late it was. He would never leave me and Annie, my granddaughter, without letting us know. But that night, the house was terrifyingly silent. The only sounds were the ticking of the clock and my heart, beating like it wanted to burst. The next morning, the first rays of sun slipped through the cracks in the wooden door, drawing faint lines of light on the kitchen floor. I stood there, trying to hold back the fear churning inside me, while my trembling hands stirred a pot of oatmeal on the stove. The smell of oats, which usually brought me comfort, couldn't shake the chill that clung to my body. On the table, there was only a cup of now cold coffee, the old ceramic mug that Eddie used every morning. Melissa had gotten up very early, earlier than me, which she almost never did. I could hear the clatter of dishes in the sink, where she was meticulously washing them. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from shaking, from breaking. And Eddie, honey, did he not come home to sleep last night? Melissa didn't turn around. Her back stiffened, and her hands paused for a moment before she continued scrubbing. Her voice came out flat, as if rehearsed. "We had a fight, Mom. He got angry and left." Her words were soft, but they felt false, like she was reading from a script. I stood there, feeling as if a stone was crushing my chest. A fight? Eddie wasn't one to get angry easily, not one to leave the house in the middle of the night without a word. My son, no matter how angry he got, would always call, or at least leave a note. I swallowed hard, trying to make my voice sound calm, more like a curious mother than a suspicious one. "And what did you fight about, Melissa? Was it that bad?" I moved closer, pretending to grab a cloth to wipe the table, but my eyes never left her back. Melissa stopped washing the dishes, but still didn't turn. "It was just little things, Mom," she replied, in the same flat voice, as if trying to brush off my question. "It's not worth worrying about." And she continued washing, faster now, as if wanting to end the conversation. I stayed silent, feeling an invisible wall rise between us. The Melissa from before, the daughter-in-law who used to sit beside me and tell me about her hometown in Oregon, the one who would laugh out loud when I taught her how to make cornbread, now seemed like a stranger. I left the kitchen, walking slowly, but inside me, a storm was raging. I was afraid that if I stayed another second, I wouldn't be able to contain myself, and I would scream at her, ask her about the black bag, about the knife, about the red stains. But I couldn't, not yet. If she knew I had seen that I was suspicious, I wasn't sure what would happen. I passed by Eddie and Melissa's room. The door was ajar. I pushed it gently and went inside. The old queen bed, where they both slept, now only had one side indented, with the blanket folded neatly. Eddie's side was cold, with no sign that he had slept there last night. On the nightstand, Eddie's phone, the thing he never let go of, was also gone. My stomach twisted. I remembered the nights when Eddie was a child, when he had a high fever, and I would sit by his bed, holding his hand until he fell asleep peacefully. And now, I was here, in my own son's room, feeling as if he had vanished from my life. I went out to the yard, seeking some air to breathe. The morning sun hit the garden, right on the spot where, just hours before, I had unearthed Melissa's horrible secret. A few chickens were scratching around, pecking right over last night's hole. My heart leaped, and I quickly shooed them away, afraid Melissa would notice. I looked around, checking that no one was watching me, and then walked towards the barn. Everything was quiet, but the feed trough was empty. Eddie was always the one who fed the cows every morning. He never missed it. His absence was a painful reminder, stabbing deep into my heart. I went to the well to draw water, as always, but my hands were shaking so much I couldn't keep my balance. The bucket tipped, and water spilled all over the yard, soaking my old sandals. I stood there, watching the puddles spread, feeling completely helpless. Just then, Melissa came out, a grocery bag hanging from her shoulder. She saw the puddle at my feet, frowned slightly, and said in a cold voice, "Be careful, Mom. Don't fall." And without waiting for an answer, she continued, "I have to go to the market to buy a few things." And she left in a hurry, with quick steps, as if she were fleeing. I watched her walk away, my heart in a knot. Melissa wasn't just avoiding me. She was hiding something, and I knew it had to do with Eddie. I sank onto the front steps, my face in my hands, trying to hold back the tears that wanted to fall. Just then, John, the milk boy, stopped his bicycle in front of the gate. He smiled, his voice carefree. "Is Mr. Eddie not around today, ma'am? He always comes out for the milk around this time." That innocent question was like a stab to the heart. I avoided his eyes, paid him quickly, and said in a trembling voice, "Oh, he had to run an errand today." John nodded and pedaled away, but I stood there, feeling like my world was collapsing. I went back to Eddie's room, as if that room could give me an answer. His closet was the same, his shirts neatly folded, but I noticed that several of his work shirts were missing. On his desk, a pile of papers with half-finished notes caught my eye. Eddie's handwriting, hurried, full of cross-outs. I picked them up, trembling, and read the scattered words. "Can't take it anymore. Divorce. Custody of Annie." Those words were like daggers straight to my heart. I clutched the papers to my chest. My legs went weak, and I had to grab the desk to keep from falling. Eddie, my son, had been thinking about getting a divorce. The fight Melissa talked about wasn't just little things. It was a deep crack, a secret that I, his mother, had no idea about. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. Lying in the old wooden bed, I stared at the ceiling, where slivers of moonlight seeped through the roof tiles. The image of the black bag, the knife with the horrible red stains, and Eddie's scattered notes about divorce swirled in my head like a relentless vortex. I wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, that Melissa, the daughter-in-law I had grown to love like a daughter, couldn't have done something so terrible. But my heart, a mother's heart, kept screaming at me that something was terribly wrong. I clutched my chest, trying to shake off the feeling of suffocation, but it clung to me, like the cold dew seeping through the fabric of my nightgown. And then, sometime after midnight, a loud thump came from Melissa's room, like a wooden chair being knocked over. The sound cut through the night's silence and made me jump, sitting bolt upright. Right after, a piercing scream tore through the air, filled with panic, mixed with muffled whimpers, as if someone was covering her mouth. My heart went wild. The blood roared in my ears. I knew immediately it was Melissa's voice. What was happening to her? Was it a nightmare or something worse? I quickly put on my robe, my hand shaking so much I almost dropped it. As I stepped into the hallway, I felt the cold wood on my bare feet, but that cold was nothing compared to the fear gripping my heart. The door to Melissa's room was ajar. A line of yellow light from a lamp escaped onto the floor, drawing a thin stripe. I stopped, pressed my ear to the cold wood of the door, and tried to listen. I heard Melissa's ragged breathing, mixed with words she mumbled in her sleep. "Don't make me. If I didn't, you would have taken everything. No, please, no." Her voice was trembling but full of desperation, as if she were begging an invisible ghost. Every word she said was like a razor in my heart. Take everything, what? And who was she referring to with "please no"? I thought of Eddie, of my son's absence, and a new terror seized me. Could these words have something to do with the black bag I dug up last night? My trembling hand rested on the door, and I pushed it open a little. Inside, the dim light of the lamp illuminated Melissa, curled up in a ball on the bed, sweat soaking her long, dark hair. Her hands were flailing in the air, as if trying to push away an unseen enemy. The glass of water on the nightstand had fallen, and the water was pooling on the wooden floor, shimmering in the faint light. Suddenly, Melissa sat up abruptly, her eyes wide open, staring at the empty wall in front of her. Then she let out another scream, sharp, full of fear, as if she had just seen something horrifying. That scream startled me. I almost dropped my robe. I couldn't stay outside any longer. I went in and placed a hand on her shoulder, shaking her gently. "Melissa, what's wrong?" "It's okay, honey." She jumped and turned to me sharply. For a second, her eyes were vacant, as if she didn't recognize me. Then she blinked and stammered, It was just a nightmare, Mom." Her voice was shaky, but I saw the panic in her eyes. She hurried to roll up the sweat-soaked sheet and stuffed it into the laundry basket in a corner, with quick movements, as if trying to hide something. I stood there, trying to look calm, but my eyes unintentionally darted to the sleeve of her white nightgown. A brownish, blurry stain, like mud, was on her wrist. My heart sank. Could it be dirt from last night's hole, or just a random stain? I wanted to ask her. I wanted to scream at her, but I knew that if I did, I would put her on guard. Melissa tried to force a smile and walked quickly to the table, picking up the phone that had fallen under the bed. She quickly put it in her robe pocket, as if she was afraid I would see something on the screen. "Mom, you should go get some rest," she said, trying to make her voice sound normal, but I heard the tension in every word. "I'm fine. It was just a silly dream." I nodded without saying anything, because I knew staying wouldn't get me any answers. I left in silence, but just as I was closing the door, I heard the click of the lock. Melissa had locked it, as if she was afraid I would come back. That sound, small but sharp, was like a confirmation that she was hiding something from me. I returned to my room, but the sound of Melissa's dream talk kept echoing in my head, like a partial confession. I sat on the bed, hugging my chest, trying to take deep breaths to calm down. But how could I calm down? The loose pieces began to fit together in my mind. The knife, the stained shirt, Eddie's notes about the divorce, and now Melissa's nightmare. Everything seemed to lead me to a truth I dared not face. The next evening, the Texas sky was painted a fiery orange, as if the whole world was trying to comfort me with a little warmth amidst the storm raging inside me. I was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of beans, trying to let the familiar smell of home cooking soothe the fear that was eating me alive. But every time I lifted the pot, my hands trembled, as if the horrible secret from the garden still weighed on my fingers. Melissa called on the phone while I was chopping onions. Her voice sounded rushed and dry. "You and Annie go ahead and have dinner, Mom. I have an errand to run in town. I'll probably be late." I just said okay, but inside, my stomach twisted. Once again, Melissa was leaving without a clear explanation. I looked out the window where the sun was setting and wondered where she was going, with whom, and if it had anything to do with Eddie's absence. I set the table, a simple dinner of pinto beans, tortillas, and a plate of sliced tomatoes. The yellow light from the lamp hanging from the ceiling illuminated the table, stretching my shadow and Annie's across the old wooden wall. Annie, my 6-year-old granddaughter, sat across from me, her eyes shining like two marbles, eating her soup with an innocence that broke my heart. Seeing her comforted me, but at the same time, my heart ached. She was the only light in these dark days, but I couldn't shake the fear that she too was being dragged into the whirlwind of secrets Melissa was weaving. I served Annie more beans, trying to make my voice sound gentle, like a casual question. "I wonder what your mom is so busy with lately, leaving so often, my love." I smiled at her, but it must have been a forced smile, because my lips felt stiff. Annie looked up, her mouth still stained with soup, and answered with complete naturalness. "Maybe she went with the man from the other day again, Grandma." Her words, light as the wind, were like a clap of thunder on a clear day for me. The spoon stopped midair. I almost dropped the bowl of beans. I tried to stay calm, took a deep breath, and asked again with a trembling voice, "What man, sweetie?" Annie nodded, stirring her spoon with her little hands as if telling a fun story. "A few days ago, Mommy took me to the park with a man I didn't know. He was really tall and smelled really nice, like cologne, and he gave me candy, Grandma, really good candy. He said he wanted to be my new daddy, but I told him no, that I only like my daddy Eddie." The girl smiled from ear to ear, as if she were telling the funniest thing in the world, but I felt a bitter lump in my throat, as if I had just swallowed a gulp of ice-cold water. A strange man, saying he wanted to be Annie's dad? My granddaughter's innocent words were like a knife stabbing deep into my heart. I looked at Annie's clean smile, and my heart ached like never before. The child didn't know that her words had just shattered the little act Melissa had put on. I wanted to hug her tight. I wanted to scream that no one could replace Eddie, but I could only stroke her head, trying to hide my trembling hand. "Oh, really?" I said, with a faint little voice. "And does your mom go out with that man often?" Annie nodded, still oblivious. "A few times now, Grandma. Mommy told me not to tell Daddy, because he would get mad. But I can tell you, right, Grandma?" She looked up at me, her round eyes full of trust. I nodded, but inside I wanted to cry. Annie, my little granddaughter, was caught in a secret she didn't understand, and I, her grandmother, felt helpless, not knowing what to do to protect her. Just then, there was a knock at the door. I jumped, quickly wiped my hands on my apron, and went to open it. It was Rose, my kind neighbor, with a basket of eggs, some still with feathers stuck to them. She smiled warmly, but her eyes were full of concern. "Brought you some eggs, neighbor, fresh from this morning." Then she leaned in close to my ear and whispered, as if afraid someone would hear her. "Last night, I saw your Melissa at the gate with a guy I don't know. And he had a car, you know? A nice one. It wasn't Eddie's truck. It just seemed very strange, so I wanted to tell you." Rose's words were like an icy wind that made me shiver. I gripped the basket of eggs tightly, feeling a coldness run down my spine. "Thanks, Rose," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. I'm sure it was just a friend. But we both knew that wasn't the truth. Rose had barely left when Melissa arrived. I heard the scuff of her sandals in the yard, and then the door opened. She came in, carrying a bag of vegetables, her face a little tired, but trying to force a smile. Seeing me standing there, she quickly came inside, saying in a friendly voice, "Thanks, Mrs. Rose, you're always so kind." But when Rose was gone, I caught a glimpse of Melissa's gaze, cold as ice, that she shot at me for an instant before turning to put things away. That look sent a chill through me, as if she were sizing me up, trying to guess how much I knew. Annie, innocent as a little bird, ran to her mother, shouting happily, "Mommy, I told Grandma about the man who's going to be my new daddy." Melissa froze. The bag of vegetables fell from her hands with a thud, and a few tomatoes rolled across the floor. She bent down quickly to pick them up, but I saw her hands were shaking, and her face was filled with panic. "Mom! Mom!" She turned to me, stammering. "He's just an old friend. He's a big joker. I'm sure the kid misunderstood." She laughed, but her laugh was forced. She couldn't hide the tension in her eyes. "Annie, don't go around saying things like that anymore, you hear?" she said to the girl in a harsher tone than usual. Annie blinked, confused, and then said in a small voice, "Yes, Mommy, I'm sorry." The air in the kitchen grew heavy, as if the whole room was holding its breath. I stood there, still holding the basket of eggs, trying to seem calm, but inside, everything was falling apart. Annie's innocent words, Rose's whisper, Melissa's cold stare, they were all pieces slowly forming a terrifying picture. I was sure that what Annie said wasn't a child's fantasy. There was a strange man, one that Melissa didn't want me or Eddie to know about. And if that man really existed, did he have anything to do with the knife, the shirt, and my son's disappearance? The next afternoon, while I was sweeping the patio, I heard the shuffle of sandals from my good neighbor Rose. She came through the gate, a small dish in her hand, and said cheerfully, "Neighbor, can I borrow a little sugar? I'm completely out." I nodded, trying to smile, but when I went into the kitchen for the sugar, Rose pulled me into a hidden corner near the fence. She lowered her voice and whispered, full of concern, "Listen, last night I saw your Melissa at the gate with that strange man again. They were arguing about something really intensely. They were talking so loud I could hear them from my house. Then the guy put her in a car, one of those shiny cars, and drove her away. It wasn't Eddie's truck, I'm sure of it." Rose's words felt like a punch to the gut. I gripped the broom handle so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I tried to keep my voice from trembling. And did you get a good look at his face, neighbor?" Rose shook her head, her eyes apologetic. "It was too dark. I only saw his silhouette. But listen to me, neighbor. This isn't normal. You be very careful." I nodded. I thanked her, but when Rose left, I had to lean on the fence to keep from collapsing. A strange man arguing with Melissa, and a car. These details were like puzzle pieces slowly fitting together, drawing a picture I dared not look at. I thought about what Annie had told me about the new daddy, and a new fear, sharp as the knife I had dug up, took hold of me. That evening, I prepared dinner with a heavy heart. Annie was playing in the yard, her clear laughter echoing all around, but it couldn't calm the storm inside me. Melissa arrived late, walking into the kitchen with a distracted look, her eyes glued to her phone. She sat at the table but didn't even touch the plate of food I had served her. Instead, she kept sending messages, a little smile playing on her lips, as if she were talking to someone who made her happy. Seeing that smile filled me with a rage that rose from deep within. But I held it back, biting my lip to keep from blurting out the questions burning in my mind. Annie, as innocent as ever, looked up from her plate of beans and asked in her clear little voice, "Mommy, is Daddy coming home for dinner tonight? Is he coming?" The girl's innocent question was like a stone thrown into a still pond. Melissa jumped, almost dropping her phone. She shot me a look, sharp as a razor for an instant, before turning to Annie and saying brusquely, "Eat your food. You ask too many questions." Her voice was harsher than usual, and Annie blinked, pressing her lips together, not daring to say another word. I continued clearing the dishes in silence, but inside, the sea was rough. Melissa wasn't just hiding something from me. She was afraid of being found out. Annie's question, though innocent, seemed to have touched a wound she wanted to keep hidden. After dinner, I went out to the back patio to get some water, needing some air to breathe. The night fell, blanketing the ranch in its darkness, and the only sounds were the pale light of the moon and the chirping of crickets. As I passed Melissa's room, I saw a sliver of light coming from under the door. I stopped unintentionally and managed to hear her whispers. Melissa's voice was low, almost inaudible, but every word hit me like a hammer. "Don't you worry. Nobody suspects a thing. Don't call me anymore. It's too dangerous." I stood frozen, my heart pounding, feeling the blood turn to ice in my veins. Who was she talking to, and what was so dangerous? I wanted to push the door open and go in. I wanted to scream at her and ask what she was hiding, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. I knew that if I acted without thinking, I could put myself and Annie in danger. I returned to my room in silence and closed the door, but sleep wouldn't come. Lying in bed, tossing and turning, the scattered images of the last few days began to appear, fitting together in a perfect, horrifying way. The knife and the shirt stained with that horrible red, buried in the garden. Melissa's scream in her nightmare, like a confession. Annie's innocent story about the new daddy. And now, Rose's gossip about the strange man, along with Melissa's secret call. They were all pieces leading me to a truth I didn't want to believe. It was very possible that Eddie, my son, had been killed, and that the culprit was none other than Melissa. A few days later, I forced myself to go to the town market, as always, to buy a few things for Annie. I couldn't let myself fall apart. I couldn't let the girl see her grandmother so weak. Every step I took away from the ranch felt heavy, as if I were carrying a stone on my back. The horrible images, the knife with the ghastly red stain, the stained shirt, Melissa's scream in her nightmare, and Annie's innocent story about the new daddy, clung to me like shadows I couldn't shake. I clutched the rosary in my blouse pocket, praying silently for the strength to go on. Though inside, all I wanted to do was scream and go searching for Eddie, my son. The town market was as noisy as ever, with the shouts of vendors, the haggling of people, and the smell of fresh cornbread mixed with that of fresh vegetables. I stood in front of Elena's stand, trying to focus on picking out tomatoes, but my hands were shaking so much that I dropped one on the ground. Elena laughed, her voice cheerful. "What's wrong, ma'am? You seem so nervous. What's worrying you so?" I just gave her a half smile, not answering because how could I tell her what was choking my heart? I continued picking vegetables, trying to lose myself in the crowd to forget, even for a minute, the fear that was gnawing at me. And then, while I was choosing some potatoes, I overheard some nearby vendors whispering together. The voice of Carmen, the fruit lady, came through loud and clear. They say that Mr. Miller, the other day when he was grazing his cows, found a man all beaten up in the vacant lot by the highway to Austin. It's a miracle he was still breathing. They already took him to the hospital, but they say it's been 2 days and no one has come to identify him. Poor thing. Those words were like a thunderclap that exploded in my head. The basket fell from my hands with a thud, and the tomatoes and potatoes rolled everywhere. The vendors turned to look at me, curious, but I paid them no mind. My heart was pounding, the blood was roaring in my ears, and my throat went dry. Trembling, I approached Carmen, my voice breaking. "Which lot did you say, ma'am? To what hospital?" Carmen looked at me, and her curiosity turned to pity. "In the vacant lot by the highway to Austin, ma'am. They took him to the public hospital in Austin. They say he's in very bad shape, but no family has come yet. Do you know him?" I didn't answer. I just shook my head, holding back tears. I left the basket there, left all the vegetables, and almost ran out of the market, stumbling on the cobblestones. I ran to the bus stop without thinking. All I knew was that I had to get there, that I had to see if that man was my Eddie. On the bus to Austin, I sat curled up in a corner, clutching my rosary so tightly it left an imprint on my palm. The landscape blurred past the window, but I saw nothing but Eddie's face, his smile, his warm voice when he called me Mom, and even the scattered words about the divorce I found in his room. My heart sometimes raced and sometimes seemed to stop. I had hope, but also a terrible fear. Hope that this injured man was Eddie, that he was still alive, but at the same time, I was afraid to face the truth. Afraid that those wounds had something to do with the stained knife, with Melissa, with the mysterious man Rose had seen. I prayed softly, asking for strength, but inside, I knew that whatever the truth was, it would change everything. The Austin Public Hospital appeared before me, with its crowded hallways and a strong smell of disinfectant that filled my nose. I practically ran to the reception desk and grabbed the arm of a young nurse, saying breathlessly, "Excuse me, miss, did you admit an unidentified male patient a few days ago? One they found badly injured in a vacant lot." The nurse looked at me, a little surprised by my desperation, then checked a logbook. "Yes, there is one, ma'am," she said in a calm voice. "About 30 years old, with multiple stab wounds. A farmer found him in a vacant lot near the Austin highway. Are you a relative?" I didn't answer. I just begged her. "Please, let me see him. I have to know." The nurse led me down long hallways. Her shoes echoed at a steady pace, but all I could hear were my own heartbeats. The heavy room door opened, and the cold white light illuminated everything. In the bed, a thin man was lying, with tight white bandages around his chest, breathing with difficulty through an oxygen mask. I got closer. Each step felt like it weighed a ton. And then I saw his face, and my heart broke into a million pieces. Eddie. It was my son. His face was pale, his lips dry and chapped. But it was Eddie, the son I gave birth to, raised, and have loved more than my own life. I ran to him. I took his thin hand, and the tears streamed down my face like a river. "Eddie, my son," I said between sobs, my voice broken. As if he sensed I was there, Eddie's eyelids fluttered. He opened his eyes slowly. His gaze was cloudy, but he still recognized me. A faint word escaped his dry lips. Mom. Just that one word, but it was enough to make me weep uncontrollably. I leaned in, pressing my ear to his mouth as my tears fell onto the white sheet. Son, what happened to you? Who did this to you? I tried to keep my voice from trembling, but how could I? My whole body was shaking with pain and fear. I needed to know the truth, no matter how horrible it was. Eddie struggled to swallow. His breath was shallow, and every word he spoke seemed to cost him all the strength he had left. I found out. Melissa was cheating on me. His voice was hoarse, weak, but each word was like a stab in my heart. I couldn't take it anymore. I told her I wanted a divorce and that I was going to fight for custody of Annie. She begged me, and then she threatened me. In the end, while we were arguing, she stabbed me with a knife. I fell to the ground. Eddie paused, closing his eyes tightly, as if the memory was too painful to continue. I squeezed his hand. The tears wouldn't stop, soaking my sleeve. Melissa, the daughter-in-law I had loved, treated like my own daughter, had stabbed Eddie. I didn't want to believe it, but the image of the stained knife, the shirt in the black bag, appeared so clearly in my mind, confirming my son's words. Eddie took a deep breath, trying to continue, his voice raspy. Melissa thought I was dead. She called some guy. I only heard the name Victor. Between the two of them, they put me in a car and went to dump me in that vacant lot to die. At that moment, I was still conscious. I closed my eyes tight and played dead. Otherwise, they would have finished me off. He stopped, looking at me with eyes full of fear. You and Annie are in danger too. Eddie's words were like an icy wind that made me tremble with terror. I thought of Annie, my little granddaughter with her clean smile, who was at home with Melissa. If Melissa could do this to Eddie, would she be capable of harming Annie? The thought made my heart stop. A nurse came in with a tray to change his bandages. I stepped back, but without taking my eyes off Eddie. Under the white gauze, the long, deep wound on his chest was red and swollen, a cruel reminder of what he had suffered. The nurse worked carefully, but every time Eddie let out a low groan of pain, I felt as if the stab was being driven into me. When the nurse left, Eddie motioned for me to come closer and said in a weak but firm voice, Mom, you have to be very careful. Don't let them know I'm alive under any circumstances. I need time to recover, and then we're going to make them pay. His gaze, though cloudy, still had a spark of determination, like a small flame that hadn't been extinguished. I nodded, quickly drying my tears, but inside I made a vow, solid as a rock. Son, I will protect you and Annie. I won't let them get away with this. I squeezed Eddie's hand, feeling his weak grip as a promise that we would get through this together. A few days after finding Eddie in the hospital, I felt like I was living in a long nightmare, where every moment was heavy and tense. Seeing my son recover little by little, being able to sit up and talk, even though he was still weak, was the only comfort in the storm raging in my soul. But I knew we couldn't just stop at having found Eddie. The truth of what Melissa and that man named Victor had done had to come out. I couldn't let them go on living as if nothing had happened. I couldn't let them threaten the lives of Eddie and Annie for another day. That morning, I helped Eddie walk to the San Marcos police station. His arm trembled as he leaned on me, but his gaze was firm, like that little flame I used to see in him as a child, when he was determined to do something, no matter how difficult it was. I pushed open the old wooden door of the station, and the smell of old papers and burnt coffee filled my nose. Inspector Gutierrez, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache, looked up from his desk and glanced at us with indifference. "How can I help you?" he asked in a monotone voice, as if we were just another unimportant case of the day. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "This is not just anything," I said, pointing to Eddie, who was sitting in a chair, his shirt revealing a piece of the white bandage on his chest. "My son was nearly killed. This isn't a domestic dispute. It's attempted murder." My voice came out louder than I expected, as if all the pain and fear of the last few days had exploded into words. Inspector Gutierrez frowned, his gaze shifting from me to Eddie, but still with a hint of doubt. "I understand you two fought often," he said, glancing at some papers on his desk. "It was probably just a family quarrel, ma'am. It can't be that serious." I slammed my hand on the table, unable to contain myself any longer. "Not that serious." I looked at my son, pointed to the wound on Eddie's chest, my voice trembling with rage and pain. "My daughter-in-law stabbed him and dumped him in a vacant lot to die. You call that a family quarrel?" Eddie, though weak, lifted his head, his gaze cloudy but full of determination. He told the horrible story, and every word broke my heart all over again. "Melissa, my wife, stabbed me after I told her I wanted a divorce and custody of my daughter. She called a man named Victor, and between the two of them, they took me to the vacant lot, thinking I was already dead. If I hadn't played unconscious, I wouldn't be here now." I added, my voice shaky but firm, "And I, with my own eyes, saw Melissa bury the knife and a shirt covered in a horrible red stain in the house's garden. That's the weapon, I'm sure of it." Inspector Gutierrez stopped glancing at the papers, and his expression became serious. He nodded, slowly, as if he finally understood this was no ordinary story. "All right," he said, his voice graver. "We'll investigate. I'll send a team of plainclothes officers to your ranch today to verify." He motioned to a young officer nearby, and I saw them begin to talk among themselves in low but urgent voices. They took us to a small waiting room with stained walls and the smell of stale cigarette smoke. Time passed slowly, each minute feeling like an hour. I sat next to Eddie, holding his hand, feeling his weak grip as a reminder that he was alive, that he was here with me. But inside, I couldn't stop worrying. What if Melissa found out Eddie was alive? Would she do something to Annie to hide her crime? I thought of my little granddaughter who was at home with Melissa, and my heart sank. "Son," I whispered, "I won't let anyone harm you or Annie." Eddie nodded, his face pale but with a spark of hope in his eyes. "I know, Mom," he said in a hoarse voice. "I trust you." That afternoon, as the sun began to set, a young police officer ran into the waiting room holding a sealed evidence bag. Inside, I saw the kitchen knife and the shirt with the ghastly red stain, the same things I had dug up from the garden that night. My heart pounded as the officer informed Inspector Gutierrez. "Preliminary results show the only fingerprint on the knife matches that of Melissa Vargas. The stain on the shirt is being analyzed, but it appears to match Mr. Eddie's blood type." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, as if part of the burden I had been carrying was gone. But at the same time, the pain returned, because now I was certain that Melissa, the daughter-in-law I had loved, was the one who had tried to kill my son. Inspector Gutierrez stood up, his face serious. "There's enough evidence to proceed with the arrest and investigation," he said firmly. Just then, the radio on his desk crackled, and a detective's voice came through urgently. "The target, Melissa, has just left the ranch. She's meeting a man at a diner on the highway. It looks like she noticed our presence, and they're preparing to flee in a car." Hearing that, I felt my heart stop. Was Melissa trying to escape? With this Victor? I clutched the rosary in my pocket, praying they would be caught before they disappeared. Gutierrez gave the order immediately, his voice sharp. "Surround them and arrest them both now. Don't let them escape." I remained silent, nervously fidgeting with the beads of my rosary, each one like a prayer for justice. Eddie closed his eyes. His pale face relaxed a little. He whispered, his voice weak but full of determination, "Finally, it's about time, Mom." I squeezed my son's hand, feeling the faint warmth coming from it, and I knew that the truth, however painful, was finally coming to light. Less than 15 minutes later, the radio crackled again. The detective's voice was excited. "We have detained Melissa Vargas and the man accompanying her. We suspect he is Victor Salazar. Both are being transported to the station." I let out a breath, feeling my entire body relax with relief. On the morning of the trial, I woke up while it was still dark, my heart as heavy as a stone. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at my gray hair and the deep wrinkles on my face, and wondered how I would get through this day. The trial in the Austin courthouse was not just where the truth would be revealed, but also where I would have to face Melissa, who was once my daughter-in-law, the one who almost took my son's life. I clutched my rosary, praying for strength, not just for myself, but for Eddie and Annie, the people I loved most. Eddie and I arrived early at the courthouse. Although he was better, he still needed a cane to walk, and the wound on his chest made him hunch over slightly with each step. Seeing my son, who used to be as strong as an oak tree, now so frail and tired, broke my soul. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of reporters had already surrounded us. The flashes from the cameras were relentless, as if they wanted to devour us. I took Eddie's hand and whispered, "Son, we're going to get through this. Justice is on our side." Eddie nodded, his gaze firm, though his face was still pale. "I trust you, Mom," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. When the patrol car carrying Melissa and Victor arrived, I felt my whole body tremble. They got out, handcuffed, with their heads down, but I still caught Melissa's nervous glance, as if she were looking for a way to escape. Victor, that man I had never seen before, was tall and looked arrogant, but his eyes couldn't hide his worry either. I squeezed Eddie's hand, trying to hold back the tears. These were the ones who almost took my son from me, who tore my family apart. I wanted to scream at them, to run up and confront them, but I knew that today the truth would speak for me. In the courtroom, the silence was so heavy you could cut it with a knife. The old wooden benches were filled with people, from witnesses to curious townspeople. I sat next to Eddie, still holding his hand, feeling his weak grip as if he were giving me courage. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with a strong voice, stood up to present the case. He laid out the undeniable evidence before the judge. The kitchen knife with Melissa's fingerprints, the shirt with the ghastly red stain unearthed from the garden, and the lab report confirming that the red liquid on the shirt was Eddie's blood. With each piece of evidence, I felt my heart sink, as if I were reliving that horrible night when I dug up the black bag. Mr. Miller, the farmer who found Eddie, stood up to testify. His voice trembled slightly, but it was clear. I was grazing my cows when I saw a man lying unconscious in the middle of the field. He was covered in blood. I thought he was already dead. I called for help, and we took him to the hospital immediately. If I had arrived any later, he surely wouldn't have made it. Mr. Miller's words were like a knife, and I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. I looked at Eddie and saw him close his eyes, his face tense, as if he were trying to endure the pain of hearing that story again. Then it was Eddie's turn. He stood up, leaning on his cane, his voice still shaky but filled with resolve. It was my wife, Melissa Vargas, who stabbed me after I told her I wanted a divorce and custody of my daughter. She called her lover, Victor Salazar, to help her dump me in the field, thinking I was already dead. Eddie's voice echoed in the courtroom, stronger than I expected, as if he had gathered all his strength to speak the truth. I clutched my rosary as tears streamed silently down my face. My son, though he had nearly lost his life, was here, confronting those who had betrayed him. Suddenly, Melissa burst into tears, falling to her knees before the judge. "It's not true," she cried, her voice broken with panic. "He forced me. That day, I had been drinking after a fight with my husband, and things got out of hand. It was supposed to end there, but Victor threatened me. He said if I didn't keep seeing him, he would tell everyone." She pointed at Victor, her face bathed in tears. But I only saw falsehood in every one of them. I remembered her cold gaze when I asked about Eddie, her whispers in the night, and my heart ached to think that she was once part of my family. Victor jumped up, slamming his hand on the table, his face red with rage. "Liar! She was the one who called me, begging me to help her cover up her crime. I just did what she asked. I didn't stab anyone." His voice was loud, filled with anger but also fear. The courtroom erupted. The murmurs of the crowd were like the crashing of waves. I just sat there, listening to them blame each other, and I felt a profound sadness. They had not only betrayed Eddie, but also the trust of me, of Annie, of this entire family. The prosecutor continued presenting evidence. The testimony of Rose, recounting the time she saw Melissa with the strange man at the gate. The medical report confirming that the stab wounds on Eddie's body were not accidental, but an intentional act. Each piece of evidence was like one more piece, completing the puzzle of Melissa and Victor's crime. Melissa lowered her head, her hands trembling, unable to say anything more. Victor kept trying to deny his guilt, but the sweat pouring down his forehead betrayed him. I looked at them, these people who were once part of our lives, now standing before the law, and I felt a mix of pain and relief. Pain for the betrayal, relief that the truth was finally coming to light. Finally, the judge, a woman with a stern face, stood to deliver the sentence. Her voice was clear and firm. Melissa Vargas, guilty of attempted murder, is sentenced to 15 years in prison. Victor Salazar, accomplice in the cover-up of a crime and aiding in its commission, is sentenced to 7 years in prison. The bang of the gavel echoed, like the final period on a long nightmare. The entire courtroom fell silent. Only the sound of Melissa's sobs and Victor's muttered insults could be heard. As they were led away, Melissa turned to look at Eddie and me. Her gaze was no longer one of remorse, but of a chilling hatred, as if she still couldn't accept the consequences of her actions. I squeezed Eddie's hand, giving him strength, and felt his weak grip in return. "Mom," Eddie whispered, his voice hoarse, "it's finally over." I nodded, tears streaming down my face, but this time they were tears of release. I knew that, in the end, justice had been served. A few months after the trial, peace slowly began to return to our ranch. The cornfields continued to grow strong under the golden Texas sun, as if they had never witnessed such dark days. Every morning, as the sun rose, I would stand on the patio, taking a deep breath of fresh air, feeling life gradually returning. But inside, I knew that the scars, not just the one on Eddie's chest, but also those on my heart and Annie's, would never fully fade. They were a part of us, a reminder of what we had overcome and the strength we had found in each other. Eddie was almost fully recovered. The long scar on his chest, reddish and puckered, was the mark of a horrible night, but he didn't let that scar define him. I would watch him, now that he could handle a hoe in the garden, mend the fence, or carry heavy sacks of corn, and my heart would swell with a mix of pride and sadness. "Mom," he said to me one afternoon as we sat in the kitchen, "I don't want Annie to grow up in fear. I want her to see her father as strong, to know that we can overcome anything. I nodded, and tears fell silently, but this time they were tears of hope. Annie, my little granddaughter, was back to running and playing in the yard. Her clear laughter sounded like silver bells, chasing away the ghosts of the past. In the first few days after the trial, she would often cuddle up next to me, and with her round eyes she would ask, "Where did Mommy go, Grandma? Is the new Daddy coming back?" Each question was like a knife, and I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. I would just hug her tight and whisper, "Your Mommy had to go away for a while, my love, but your Grandma and your Daddy will always be here with you." Gradually, Annie stopped asking about her mom or the new Daddy. Perhaps she was too young to understand it all, but I knew that deep down, she too was trying to heal in her own childlike way. I continued to wake up early every day, as has been my habit for years. I would prepare a pot of hot oatmeal, and the smell would fill the kitchen, mingling with the crowing of the roosters and the sound of the wind through the fields. These familiar sounds of ranch life, though simple, were like medicine for my soul. I would stand by the stove, stirring the oatmeal, and think about the months that had passed, the sleepless nights filled with fear, the hours in the hospital holding Eddie's hand, praying for him to wake up. Now, when I looked out at the yard and saw Eddie and Annie playing together, I felt a sense of peace returning, even though I knew the road ahead still had its challenges. Eddie decided to reopen the small family distillery, a dream he had told me about since he was young. One evening, sitting on the porch, he looked at me with shining eyes. "I want Annie to grow up in a place that's safe and that she can be proud of, Mom. I want her to know that her dad and her grandma will always be there for her. The distillery isn't just about making money. It's about keeping our traditions alive, so she has something that reminds her of her family." I smiled and put a hand on his shoulder. "Son, I know you'll succeed, and I will always be here with you and Annie." Eddie's words were like a promise, not just to Annie, but to me as well, that we would rebuild everything from the ashes. Every now and then, Mr. Miller and Rose would visit, bringing us something from their garden, a basket of ripe tomatoes or some soft, fragrant avocados. Once, while Mr. Miller was having coffee with us, he clapped Eddie on the shoulder and smiled kindly. "You were given a second chance at life, Eddie. Cherish it and cherish the people who love you." Eddie nodded with a look of gratitude. "I'll never forget what you did for me, Mr. Miller," he said in his deep voice. "If it weren't for you, I might not be here now." Seeing them, I felt my heart warm, as if the kindness of people still existed amid so much pain and loss. Every weekend, I took Annie to the small-town church. She would hold my hand and skip along, telling me about her games at school. In the church, under the dim light of the candles, I would kneel and light a candle for Eddie, one for Annie, and one for the lost soul of Melissa. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive her, but I know that forgiveness, as difficult as it is the only way my family and I can move on. I prayed for Melissa, not because she deserved it, but because I didn't want my heart to live imprisoned by resentment. I wanted Annie to grow up in a home filled with love, not bitterness. At night, I often sit on the porch, watching the distant lights of the city of Austin. The moon illuminates the cornfield, making it sparkle like jewels. I think about what we lost, the trust, the peace, and a part of our family, but I also think about what we kept, Eddie, Annie, and the love we have for each other. Annie's laughter comes from inside the house, clear and full of hope, like a song that calms my heart. "Grandma, will you make me pancakes tomorrow?" she shouts, running to hug me. I laugh and pull her close, feeling her warmth. "Of course, my love, I'll make you a whole stack." I close my eyes, feeling the night wind in my gray hair, with a calm I haven't felt in a long time. Life has thrown terrible things at us, but now we are learning to heal. I know there will be difficult days, moments when Annie asks about her mother, or nights when Eddie wakes up from a nightmare. But I also know that as long as we have each other, we will overcome everything. After all that has happened, I just want to leave a message for everyone. In life, the most dangerous things are not the storms outside, but the lies and betrayals hidden within your own family. The truth, no matter how cruel, must come to light, because hiding it only deepens the wound and drags innocent people into a whirlwind of suffering. I learned that only love, strength, and the will to protect your own give you the power to overcome the darkest days. Justice may be slow, but it eventually arrives, and when it does, the important thing is not to let your heart fill with hate, so you can continue to live, continue to love, and so that children can grow up in the light of truth and not in the shadow of a lie. The story you have just heard has had its names and locations changed to protect the identities of those involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to keep the peace, or would you dare to face it all to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else. God always blesses, and I am convinced that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the end screen, I'm leaving you 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.